Well, good evening. Welcome to the Scottish Society for Northern Studies Seminar Series. Just to remind you that the cameras and mics are turned off during the talk. If you've got any questions that you wish to ask the speaker, you can enter them into the chat facility and then I'll put them to the speaker at the end of the talk. Just a quick reminder, our next seminar will be at 7 p.m. GMT on the 7th of March. Dr. Harriet Evans-Tang will be speaking about animal-human relationships in medieval Iceland. Now to today's talk. Tonight's talk will be given by Dr. Rosemary Power, who is an associate researcher at the National University of Ireland, Galway. Rosemary is a historian who has published extensively on Norse-Gaelic contacts. This has ranged from the Isle of Man to Ireland and Hebrides, but also including links to Icelandic sagas, and she's also covered work on Icelandic folk traditions. Rosemary has recently been researching pilgrimage and pilgrimage routes, including a project on Colmcille's pilgrim routes to Iona. She has written extensively on these Norse-Gaelic literature and literary transmissions in the medieval period, including on the subject of tonight's talk. And that is the role of Iona as an intermediary place between Norse and Gaelic worlds. So it's my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Rosemary Power. So thank you very much.
Thank you, and thank you very much for coming and for your introduction, Ryan. Can you hear me? Yeah, is that okay?
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Ryan. This paper originally originated with a conference on the Bishop Adam of Caithness, which is in 2022, and I'm hoping for comments this evening as it's due to be published later in the journal Abba as Connections and the Church in Late North Scotland. That's a special issue this year. I think at least one of the editors, Tom Fairfax, is present tonight, so ask him the questions. I've also been working quite extensively on the nunnery on Iona, partly in publication and partly in process from the Derry Conference and the Glasgow Arts Iona Conference. I'm at present only looking at the 12th and 13th centuries, though in fact my academic career started with Norse-Gaelic literary contacts or evidence of Irish influence in Icelandic sagas. And so at present, although I'm working on the historical aspects, I would be very interested in looking again at some of the high medieval literary potential contacts. Having written previously on the politics, I'm looking tonight at the ecclesiastical links, such as we can find them, with the possibility that both monasteries on Iona provided essential links. So in this, I include the nunnery, for while the women there lived enclosed lives, they were undoubtedly aware of what was going on and were visited and were often related to the political movers of the time. That's for the aristocratic choir nuns and their followers, and lay sisters would have also had contacts. The nuns have been largely forgotten in lack of written records, but their role can't be excluded entirely, as even though they didn't have the travel options that the men of the Benedictine monastery had. So I'll talk a little bit about the background, the establishment of the monasteries, and then some of the specific stories from the north. But it's difficult for me to see as transmitted in any other way but through influence on the island of Iona. So most of the slides will actually be on the monastic foundations because it's difficult to look at medieval stories. For orientation on where Iona is, if I could have the next slides, please, Rebecca. That is Scotland as we usually know it. I've got a message here saying, has it improved? Is that for me, Ryan, or is it something to do with sound?
No, sorry, it was to the sound. Sorry, I was just checking with somebody.
All right, thank you. And the next one, please. Scotland and Ireland as we know it, but from the other perspective, nothing in size compared to the Sahara on one side and Greenland on the other. Next slide, please. It's that small island, which is in about the middle of this. I don't know if my pointer, if you can see my pointer, will point to here, just a bit down. Down, you're getting closer. That was Bute. Ah, no, that's Tyree. Anyway, in the general area, I'm not, so, and next slide, please. And I will be discussing these points. In the center, you'll see an arrow marked pointing towards Finnefort, which is actually the port opposite Iona. I'll be talking about Canna, which is the island which the northern arrow is pointing to. Derry, which is on the far lower left, and briefly Saddle Monastery, which is on the lower right. Next, please. And more distinctly, that is a small island of Iona off the Calf, the Ross of Mull, one of the larger islands of the Hebrides. Next slide, please. And here in the 6th century, Columba actually built a monastery. The foundation, which is northernmost, is the revived Benedictine cloister, which was built on top of that monastery, while the nunnery is in the area now called the village, some 400 meters to the south. A little bit of fertile ground there. Next slide, please. And of course, they had visitors. Next slide, please. As we usually get. And let's get away from them and on to the next slide, because in spite of Vikings and marauders, life on the island continued. Interesting point, the archaeologist Kathleen Forsyth has made a case for an earlier monastery on Iona attached to that earlier Columban monastery in the pre-Viking period. It's slight, it's a mixture of archaeology, human remains and place names, but is an exciting new development for the island's understanding of the island. And that, of course, is the Benedictine Abbey, which was built on top of the Columban monastery, still showing evidence of some aspects of the Columban monastery all the same, but a very different style of life and power and availability to pilgrimage. Life continued. Many of the monastic men went to Kells in 814, but some remained on the island, which was again raided several times by the Vikings. And then in the early 13th century, formally adopted the Benedictine rule over the Columban. What you see, of course, is the rebuilt 20th century rebuild of, first of all, the monastic church and later of the domestic buildings. And this being Iona, there's always a good rainbow in the background. And the high medieval nunnery is nearby. Next, please. Two key saints are here honoured in 20th century style. Columcille, the founder, 6th century saint, as depicted in the 1960s as part of the Celtic movement. And Margaret of Scotland died in 1093, that rather fierce Saxon princess who got her right to remain in Scotland by marrying the king. She's in a 1910 depiction here in the Abbey, she rebuilt the ruinous state, and you see her with various architects' tools. The little bit of fluff around her neck is not ectoplasm, but is in fact an almost listed giant cobweb, which is too high up for anybody to tackle. Next slide, please. This is one of it re-roofed, but the oldest building otherwise on the island. It's Relic Orange Chapel in the second. Apparently a 12th century mortuary chapel for the kings of the Isles on an older secular burial ground with, in about the 1150s, this new-fashioned Romanesque doorway. Perhaps when this part of the Hebrides was conquered by Somerled of Argyll, from his brother-in-law, Guzreza of Man, in 1156. At that time, the bishopric of the Isles and then the archbishopric were based in Nidaros, in modern Trondheim in Norway, which inherited within its territories this ancient Columban monastery in the 12th century, which for some reason took the Benedictine rule, and also the high medieval nunnery, which more normally followed the Augustinian rule. We know surprisingly little about the island and the religious communities in the late Norse period, given its significance regarding Ireland and Scotland. And so a lot of what the roles it plays must be speculative, putting together very fragile evidence. Knowledge of Iona is shown in certain Icelandic and Norwegian texts, which will be used. So this is about the place of Iona and its male and indeed female religious communities within the context of its position in the 12th and 13th centuries as a conduit for information. It's also about halfway up that long stretch of the Kingdom of Man and the Isles, a tributary of Norway, at least in theory. Physical background is well known, and there have been and there are also understanding from the near contemporary Norse perspectives for the use of Buglingasaga, Hákonarsaga, and various other literary and indeed diplomatic sources. The Scottish perspectives are largely based on later records. As I've mentioned the nunnery several times, if we can have the next slide, looking at that doorway, which apparently is a nice Irish style doorway of a chapel, and then move on to the nunnery, which, oh, right, something has got out of order. In the 1150s as well, the family of Somerled of Argyll, who now controlled most of the Isles, apart from the Isle of Man and Lewis, also developed a monastery of Cistercians at Saddle on Kiltyre, slightly inland, quite a small foundation. Again, very limited, though the grey monks, as they were called, do appear in Hákonarsaga, and are known from other sources. Very little is left of it, but it seems to have been of a very different style from the foundations on Iona. And if we can have the next slide, which were much more open to the sea. This is the arcade of the church of Iona Nunnery, which of course is ruined. Has a lot of very beautiful features, and I've argued, contrary to being slotted in as an afterthought to the Benedictine Abbey, it was actually earlier. The architectural record seems to suggest that the Abbey copied and built larger and grander, but with very much the same decoration as the nunnery. And in terms of the financial and peaceful, as far as we know, period of 1180s, I have suggested that it was actually established then as an Augustinian a nunnery attached to a Columban abbey, following the ancient rule, as happened in a number of places in Ireland at the time, which also adopted Augustinian rule. It is very elegant and very much of a piece compared to the abbey, which was thrown up quite fast and had a degree of opposition to being built at all. This seems to be fairly steady work, very beautiful limestone, and what remains is obviously of high quality. It's the known political situation and the spreading of wealth. So there was a foundation at Saddle, say, 1150s, 60s, 1180s, the nunnery, 1203, the transmission to Benedictine and to a Benedictine cloister on the Western style. Seems to balance. The Benedictines, we know from their charter from the 9th of December in 1203, came from Rome. So I'll return to that. This is the nunnery, as I said. It has been put later, largely because of a text in the 17th century book of Clan Ranald, that says that Ragnar, son of Sudled, developed 3 monastic foundations. One the Benedictines, the black monks of Iona, the black nuns in the same place, and also the beautiful grey-coloured monks of Kintyre. It's an odd word in Gaelic. In fact, the Kintyre one was earlier, and I think that he established the black monks before the black nuns, not because he knew about the 20-year difference, but simply he saw them as more important. And indeed, it was a male foundation in its origins. As today, if can I have the next slide, please? This is the chapter house of the nunnery, where any kind of discussion and business involving any of these movements between the Gaelic world and the Norse would have occurred. And the next slide, please. And this is what remains of the east window of the church. As today is St. Bridget's Day, the orientation of the nunnery church may be of some interest, and there may indeed be Scandinavian equivalents, which I'd be grateful to know about. There's a theory for those churches which are not orientated east-west, that it may be due to the orientation on sunrise on a particular dedicatory saint's day. None of the 3 great medieval buildings on Iona, the Abbey Church, the Ralgoran Chapel, and the Nunnery Church, actually point due east-west, though other buildings do, other churches do. This one, if it points due to that theory, which is controversial, it would point to the azimuth would be about the 14th of February, or transferred to the Gregorian calendar, 7th, with the difference of about 7 days at the period. That would put it very close to 2nd of February, the presentation of the Virgin Mary in the temple 40 days after the birth of Jesus. Very much a good date for the establishment of a nunnery with a virgin saint. And the day before is Bridget's Day. You have a virgin saint who was also a nun. However, the nearby chapel, which a slide will come up shortly of, is dedicated to St. Ronan, a companion of St. Columba and Bishop of the island of Lismore. That's the Scottish Lismore. His patronal festival is actually the 7th. But to make matters more complicated, there's been a suggestion recently by Gilbert Marcus that the original dedication was to a female saint, Ronat, the mother of Adafnan, abbot of Iona. So you actually have a period, none of them quite relates to the 7th of February, but there may be conditions, change of the axis of the earth, practical needs with regard to the building, but it does seem to have a possible orientation towards Bridget and the presentation of Mary, with Ronan, if he was around at that stage, as a kick-in. Unfortunately, we don't have a dedicatory feast day for Ronat, mother of Iona. Bridget, of course, was a highly popular saint in the Western Highlands. It's complicated, and it would be good to know more about dedications of saints in the northern world. Meg Cormack has kindly provided evidence, such as it is, of 2 dedications to Columba on Iceland, and a recent article by Courtney Selvage has looked at the, again, slight but very interesting evidence from Norway. This is the nunnery church before it was before the roof collapsed in about 1830. Sketched shortly before by James Logan. Can I have the next slide? And this, looking out from a side chapel of nunnery church, looks towards what is now the 13th century, remains of the 13th century Islanders Chapel, dedicated to St. Ronan, which does indeed point due east. And underneath this was found an earlier church, and underneath that were found burials, though they were too fragmentary to see whether, in fact, this had been a long-term female site. The first prioress, we're told, in about 1700 by Martin. Martin was daughter of some, and she certainly was evident that she, Behoc, Latinized Beatrice, prioress, daughter of Somerled, was at least a substantial early prioress. She could have trained at any time of the late 12th century, and moreover, there may be reasons why she and perhaps an entire congregation of nuns left Ireland at that period. We don't know much about her qualifications. I think the next slide with her soul. All right, here's Somerled, just a bit of fun. And the next slide, if you like, Somerled of Argyll, as depicted by people like Nigel Tranter as the great warrior of Gaeldom who kicked the Norse out of the Isles, which he didn't. Here he is in full glory. Can we go back to something else? If the next slide. Oh yes, this is back to the nunnery side chapel. These are just a couple which show some of the architecture which was copied and indeed expanded in Abbey. Behoc herself, her tombstone was here until the 18th century. So far, this is Gaelic rather than Norse. I do think, though, that to establish a nunnery of this kind and to ensure it was Augustinian may have required the approval of the archdiocese, where we had three powerful archbishops, Eystein Elamson, who had to spend part of his time in exile, brought Augustinians to Norway, and followed by two archbishops who were themselves Augustinians. Given the other difficulties that Iona seems to have had, both in the Norse world and in Scotland, this may have been a form of appeasement. Another reason why nuns may have established themselves in the 1180s refers entirely to Ireland. It may have been advantageous to a community of nuns to decamp entirely or in part from somewhere, for example, like Kells, which was suffering considerably under the Anglo-Norman wars, possibly Derry, to come with a leader like Behoc of a powerful family to settle here on Iona. But these we'll never be quite sure of. So far, so Norse. Can we have the next slide? Thank you. That's also the inside of this surviving chapel with that window which Ian Fisher described as Irish. Next slide. That's a part of what's called the Iona Psalter, manuscript 10,000 in the National Library of Scotland, produced in about 1200 for a nun interested in saints of the Columban tradition. So there may also have been a Scottish reason for the choice of nunnery, because it took place at a time when Scotland had reacted quite badly to an event in 1164 when Somerled of Argyll, the father of Behoc, had attempted to re-establish Iona as the chief house of the Columban Federation of Monasteries. This came to nothing, and he was actually killed later that year. But there was a certain punitive actions by the kings of Scotland. I think this psalter may have been hidden, like many things, in 1210, when there was a raid of Norwegians on the island of Iona. This was part of an expedition of foray from Norway, which has been written about elsewhere. At this time, and unfortunately this is one of the slides that's got lost, certain circlets, gold circlets, as worn by young girls before marriage, and also adorning statues, for example, they might have been part of a dowry brought by a nun, together with some very fine spoons, were found under a stone in a nunnery, and shortly afterwards coiled and hidden at the corner of a nearby St. Ronan's church were others. They're very fine workmanship of, say, the 11th, late 12th century, found mostly during renovations in 1922. All these portable items may have been hidden at the time of that raid. It also does strike me that that was not a good time to found a monastery, so it may have already been there. Coming on to the next slide. Oh, I put this in always because on the external point of the refectory is this Sheila Nigig, which has been written about separately and may have been there as apatrek magic against evil, and I think particularly to frighten away the devil. Always asked about, so I put her in, but shall we go on to the next slide? There is Eystein Eysteinsson, who may have been involved with the foundation of a nunnery. There he is in a modern depiction with his own cathedral at Trondheim. He's the only bishop when we turn to the abbey, which I think we might do on the next slide. Oh, right, that's a bit of the abbey in its 15th century manifestation. And the next slide. And this is part of the central part with the base of a cross from the 8th century, which the base is in situ. The cross is in fact a concrete replica from the 1950s. And just behind it, now built into the monastery since the 15th century, is a small chapel, which appears to be the mortuary chapel dedicated to St. Columba and his relics, kept there at some time. Much of the rebuilding is of the 15th century abbey, where this, for example, was attached to the back wall. It would have been freestanding at the time. And this is the central space. The abbey and its reasons for becoming Benedictine are again more of a mystery. And although it's not the only late, apparently independent or near independent foundation from a Benedictine perspective, it is somewhat unusual regarding what was common in Ireland, where Cistercians were, stricter form of Benedictines were common, and indeed August. It's not known how it was seeded. It looks like an internal refoundation, possibly without any permission from the Bishop of the Isles or from the Archdiocese, and certainly of a form which annoyed considerably clerics, both native and Norman, in the north of Ireland, who sailed from Derry the winter after the foundation establishment and destroyed the monastery, razed what was already built without permission, as we're told, and evicted the then abbot and put their own man in his place. But that didn't last, and the abbey progressed, but was built very fast, particularly well in part, and then was considerably extended in the 1220s, possibly, even though that was a period of Russian on the Isle of Man and Saddle were, of course, both Cistercian. The refoundation had a papal charter, apparently rapidly acquired as soon as an elderly abbot had died in 1203. That is the winter in which the Pope may have received advice from somebody even more distant and remote than Iona. Can I have the next slide? Oh, right, that's a cross in situ on Iona, very close, as is the street beside it. Next slide. That's looking over the Sound of Iona, which is about a mile wide. Is the next slide available? Just to be a bit gruesome. Bishop Iona Arnason Smirit, Bishop of Greenland, was actually in Rome in the winter of 1224, so may have been an advisory to this. He actually returned to Greenland and was buried in his own cathedral there to be dug up by the archaeologists in the 20th century. but we know nothing more except there is one poem which is printed in translation in Thomas Clancy's Triumph Tree, with at least one disgruntled monk who felt that foreigners had taken over his monastery. Coming back to Young Spirit, a couple of extra slides here, if I may, Rebecca. Is Rebecca? That's the remains of a cathedral in Greenland. And if we have next one, this is pure indulgence because we don't get many slides of Greenland in the Norse period. Can I have the next one? And that's how it's farmed today. That's the lands of Garda, the cathedral in Greenland. So this was not an easy time for the beginning of it, but how did this establishment really function in the northern world? We know something of its relations with Ireland and Geldum, but we don't really know how it fitted into Norway's history, which may shed light on the choice of rule. It doesn't seem to have been influenced by Scotland. And indeed, the Papal Charter of 1203 gives no authority to the bishops of the Isles to interfere with engagement with the running of the monastery, which relates directly to Rome. As I said, the women can't be excluded as storytellers in this. Some of the potential conflicts in the 12th and 13th century have been covered elsewhere, but we still need to know what was this position. And we have slight evidence of transmission in all kinds of ways. There are, of course, the Lewis chess pieces, the first Western chess pieces to have a bishop as one of the pieces, and very much in the late 12th century fashion in mitres. There has been a suggestion in a recent book that Peel on the Isle of Man and the bishopric and the Cistercian monastery there had a major part in the transmission of information. But that would also involve passing by Iona, and at least on one occasion we know that both Bishop and Abbot of Iona went to Norway in 1226 seeking help because of turmoil in the islands. Coming on to some of there are good, if limited, descriptions of the Hebrides in various sagas, including, of course, Hákonar's saga. And we see the gradual extension of Norwegian power to not only summon Hebridean and Manx rulers to court, but to act as kingmakers. While commentary on the 11th century Iona is in passing and occurs in compilation, and of course there are literary works known in the Norwegian court, both in the vernacular and mostly in Latin, which do relate to Ireland in particular and its wonders, there isn't very much we can build on. Looking for direct or transmitted elements of links with Iceland, we may look to an incident in 1202. This occurs in a number of sources in relation to the consecration of Bishop-elect Guðmundur Arason and his attempts to leave Iceland for his consecration in Trondheim. These near contemporary sources don't all fit neatly together. There may have actually been more than one informant. But there is a voyage described that Guðmundur undertook on a trading vessel. It's clear that there was a northeasterly wind because he couldn't get around the northern coast of Iceland, the shortest way to Trondheim. So after visions and usual prayers, they took the southern route around Iceland, only to be built badly off route to land, or at least see St. Kilda. In one source to learn that the King of Norway had died, which means they weren't the first ship in that year, and also may have other impacts. Were blown to the coast of Ireland, which they seem to have known quite well where they were. Expected the monks shaved their tonsures in preparation, and everyone confessed their sins. Bishop-elect Guðmundur required somebody else to take control of the ship and the steerage, and they came to good harbour in the island of Canna. Sadly, that's one of the slides which is missing, but Canna is still a very good harbour in the Hebrides. Its adjacent island is called Sunday today, and this does seem to be the Sunday named in the Hebrides in the sources. This was an Iona dependency, and this was in its last year of Columban rule and architectural style, so odd to them, but still something to risk, and they got to good harbour. They knew where they were going and assuredly went to an Iona dependency. So all the accounts identify the spiritual harms and the blessings that accompany the saintly, if ever turbulent, movement out of sun. The weather pattern is perfectly credible. Winds from this direction can in our times blow for weeks, making the northeast passage from Iceland hard to sail, and harbours like those at St Kilda in the right weather, and Canna with Sander in most weathers is a good place to find shelter. And these would be highly identified. It's clear that they knew where they were in the Hebrides. This may be a reason why in 1210 the Hebrides suffered that raid from Norwegians, and possibly by the same leader in 1229, though he not raid Iona on this occasion, a disgruntled member, grandson of a Somerled family. These versions of the Böglunga saga have been explored elsewhere. Iona among the Hebrides was raided. There was outrage in the saga. This had never been done before. Always that holy island had been protected, which is quite a nice way of avoiding 300 years of Viking raiding. And the people were severely rebuked. And according to one source, when they set out on their joint pilgrimage for next year, one of their ships sank, and serve them right, is the text. Ireland's position from a Gaelic perspective is no longer very clear after 1204, the last annalistic reference. Irish sources contain more on internal events, while Iona's decrease in power in the early 13th century has been treated extensively by Ian Boyerman. But its geographical position, to say nothing of extensive lands across the Hebrides and the mainland, show that it must have been important. How much they knew is difficult. There were two known church dedications in Ireland. There was in Iceland, forgive me, and both the names Columba and Columcille are used almost interchangeably in the north. Columcille being declined in Icelandic. And so on, which Courtney Selvage has also looked at. More directly, there's an appearance in the 13th century Hákonar saga, Hákonarssonar, which is nearly contemporary, of Columcille with two other saints appearing in a dream to Scotland's King Alexander II when he was at the point of invading and seeking to control the Hebrides. These three saints warned him against invasion. The fiercest of the three saints appears as Mjög Framsnóðin, very short cut at the front, that is, with more or less a bald front of scope. This detail seems to be a comment on the earlier clerical frontal tonsure abandoned on Iona in 718. A detail that can only really have come from somebody familiar with Iona's history. He's the fiercest, fiercer than Oliver of Norway, the Rex Perpetuus, from whom Hákon himself claimed collateral ancestry, and Magnus of Orkney, the martyr of Scandinavia. The author, Sturla Þórðarson, was nephew to the great Icelandic writer Snorri Sturluson, and who wrote this in the 1270s in Norway, where he had access to people at court, had been in the Hebrides with Hákon. He, like other Norse writers, uses the term Ein Helga, the Holy Island, throughout his work. Though the final journey of King Hákon in 1263, when he sought to reclaim the Isles for Norway, somewhat surprisingly, includes him sailing around Milakarva, the calf, or the Ross of Mull, but no reference to Iona is made, though Sturla must have known its geographical proximity. In the realms of literature with historical setting, there are sources in Landnámabók and Kjarnesinga saga of a Norse Christian convert advised by Hebridean Bishop Patrick to sail and to dedicate his first church on Iceland to Columba, or Columbkilla, depending on which. The bishop's name Patrick is closer to the Gaelic Patrick than it is to the Latin Patricius. While we can't make much of that, we can possibly make more of another text, the medieval Icelandic Hallfreðr saga Vandræðaskáld, the saga of Hallfreðr, the troublesome poet, the one-time poet to Olafur Tryggvason, the predecessor of Olafur, the Saint of Norway, king for 5 years, who is credited with the conversion of Iceland to Christianity. And there was some move in Iceland to promote him as the Icelandic saint, even though he's a Norwegian king, rather than Olaf, the Saint of Norway. At one stage in his career was Olafur Tryggvason, and he is a regular recidivist from the Christianity of Olafur, and always forgiven for his returns to paganism, which he loved for the kennings and the poetry, which is often quite personal poetry. His talented but often backsliding poet is given on one occasion 3 gifts: a mantle of costly fabric, that's a velvet or brocade, a helmet and an arm ring, prophesying that these will go into his coffin with him when he's buried at sea. He is, some years later, indeed buried at sea by his son and companions during bad weather when journeying home from Sweden to Iceland. These items are placed in a coffin, which is sent overboard and washes up on Iona, an island not normally met with when traveling from Sweden to Iceland. The mantle is made into, after various other adventures, the mantle is made into an altar cloth, the helmet into a candle holder, and the arm ring into a chalice. Now, the story is obviously literary, composed much later than the alleged events, which were about the year 1007, in part echoing an event in Islendingabók and Ea saga, where coffins containing a deceased person is sent overboard and washed up as a certain place. While this is hagiographical, part of an attempt to promote Olaf as saint, rather than this tricky poet, who nevertheless is going to get Christian burial, though not without difficulty, he is, the tensions are there. He washes up on Iona. I believe it's not impossible that the Iona, which is not mentioned previously in the saga, is noted, and it's attributed. It is not necessary to attribute to Hallfreðr himself the possibility that a wealthy deceased Norseman of Christian tendencies was indeed buried on Iona, presumably after arriving in more normal circumstances, and that various gifts accompanied his coffin, as was customary for masses for his dead to be said, as well as burial, and that these items were transferred from personal adornment and military use into items that were still available to be seen on Iona in the 13th century. Interesting on that point, one of the requirements of the Augustinian rule for women is their care of vestments and altar furnishings. And while the men would have had to look after the velvet mantle for a long time when it's been transferred into altar coverings, that would have been a role for women, and stories no doubt developed around them. It is, of course, a fitting end for a poet, and it is, in fact, when the coffin arrives on Iona, servants of the abbot find it, tip out the body, bury it in the bog, and steal the contents. But Olafur Tryggvason, in a saintly matter, arrives in a dream with the abbot, who instantly recognizes him, informs him of what's going on, as is common in such tales. The servants confess. The body is recovered and buried in the churchyard. The king's honour and apparent sanctity are enhanced, and all ends as well as possible for the poet. Whether or not that's true, and whether in fact these very slight indications of Iona as a transmitter of, and perhaps a creator of stories, is delicate, is fragile. But it is of such a position within the Hebrides and Man that it is difficult to see that it would not have had some influence. So this is an attempted excursus on where Iona related to Ireland through both male and female monasteries, how it fitted, as far as we know, within the Norwegian Archdiocese, and what kind of stories may have been told there. I've not looked into stories that may have gone in the opposite direction, and the Nordic influence on this Irish-derived monastic community within that archbishopric is uncertain. Information obviously passed via secular sources all this period from the islands to Norway, probably by seafarers, clerical or secular. However, due to intent or foul weather, Iona remained central to the kingdom, revered and relevant to Scotland as well from ancient times, and part of the Irish sphere of influence until at least the early 13th century. Its role in transmission may well have been significant, though only fragments of evidence survive. But thank you for listening. Oh, shall I see what else? Slides, can I have next slides? Oh, this is a short account in an Icelandic saga much later, which I cannot believe arrived. This is about Magnus Bareleggs as hostages in 1098 in Ireland. The saga is 14th century, and I would suggest this is one of the ways in transmission happened. There is a Norwegian among the hostages. It's all very gentlemanly. Hostages find their own way to Irish King Murdoch, Ibrian. The Norwegian among them said he spoke Irish well, and this is something which is still current as a joke. Then he said to the king, Murdoch, Mali Dirak, which in our language is, cursed be you, king. One of the courtiers responded, Lord, he said, this man must be the thrall of all the Norsemen. The king replied, Olgira, Yagal, I think, which is in our language unknown as a dark road. The king treated them well. This has been looked at a number of times as Malak Dich Ari, cursed you king in Irish. He's obviously been taken in. It's one of those Pokmahoin stories you still get. Go and say so-and-so to the sergeant major. It means good morning, which of course it doesn't. But the joke is that the person in power recognizes that somebody's been set up, as Murdoch does now. I've also suggested actually a couple of lines are missing, and Olgera Ragar, which is something to do with an Okara Agyal or something like that, and so on. Next slide, please. But I'm suggesting that also may have been part of this verbal transmission. And that is Iona constantly with a rainbow. And may I just have a last slide? Oh, right. That's the thanks to sponsors. And there should have been a couple of publications on it, which have vanished. But thank you for listening. Can we go back to the last slide? The previous slide? Thank you.
Thank you very much for a fascinating talk. That was great. Thank you. We've got a few questions come through. Jenny Murray was asking, who was the academic that was looking at the dedications in Scandinavia?
Oh, there's two. In Iceland, it's Margaret Cormack, who is also publishing with me in a volume which is coming out in Spidell in Connemara for the University in Derry in April. The one who has written on Norway's dedications for Columcille is Courtney Selvage.
And we've got one from Brett Pine. Has any Gaelic apotreic reliefs been found in Scandinavian churches?
Oh, right. These are the Sheila gigs. They're not particularly associated with the Gaelic world, though they're quite frequent. I write also about County Clare, where there are no fewer than 8. But you find them in England, you find them in Orkney Cathedral, in Orkney and St. Magnus Cathedral. There is possibly one on Trondheim Cathedral. I haven't seen it myself. And you find them on the pilgrim routes across northern France and into Spain. Sometimes with other images. There are three theories about them. One is warning against lust, but it's difficult to see how it works unless it's for pilgrims, and the other of the seven deadly sins have disappeared. And although lust was considered to be the worst, the most dangerous deadly sin for women, avarice was for men, and that's not depicted. Nor in fact are male phallic images very common. I wrote about this in Folklore in 2012, based on the Iona image, but using others. And I came to the conclusion that they were there not only as apotreic, but distinctly to frighten away the devil. And that can be argued, but that's where I am. Thank you.
Sam Leggett has just messaged in saying that there's an indication of an early medieval nunnery on Iona. There's new bioarchaeological archaeological evidence from Martyrs Bay, which is surprisingly an entirely female ADNA, but predates the Summer-led period nunnery. So this would be a convenient explanation if an earlier female foundation is plausible.
Yes, I don't know if Sam Leggett is in touch with Catherine Forsyth, who was looking at these bones, and I was waiting to hear the new biological archaeological evidence about the Martyrs Bay bones from cemeteries, which seemed to be surprisingly and entirely female, but also, as far as could be determined, from women who had not born children, and certainly children were not there present as a normal in a women's cemetery. So yes, that is quite exciting. Catherine Forsyth has actually linked it with two place names on Iona, which have been previously translated as tradesmen, craftsmen, but she believes could actually, and there's evidence of being applied linguistically to tradeswomen and particularly embroideresses, and embroidery, as we know, being one of the roles of nuns, the preservation and creation of good fabrics. So if indeed the Clough the Runac and the other place name, which I forget, but is also in the same field, are correct, there may be evidence of a female foundation by Martyrs Bay on Iona, which unfortunately would also be extremely exposed to the Vikings.
Sam's just messaged back. She's actually doing the isotopes for the actual. She's got the bones in her lab at the moment.
What Catherine has?
No, Sam has.
Sam has. Oh, yeah. Congratulations! Do keep me informed, please. This is really quite exciting.
If there's any more questions, you want to put them into the chat. I've got a couple of questions that came to me.
Can I just follow on from one thing from Sam? It looks like there was a female identification with the site which the nunnery is now on, especially if Gilbert Marcus is correct about the possibility the earlier chapel was dedicated to Saint Ronat and was one of the female saint and was one of those which were overtaken by male dedications. But it's obviously a different site from a nunnery one. Thank you. Sorry to interrupt.
No, it's fine, don't worry. I was just thinking, when you were talking about the negative views of when you talk about Iceland and the later period of the 13th century and that sort of change, it reminded me of something Alan McNiven had mentioned to me before about in the sagas, there's a negative view of Hebrideans in a lot of sagas, and it might well be from this sort of 12th, 13th century change in the dynamics in the North Sea. Yeah. I don't know if you have anything to say on that.
Yes, Hákonar's saga, which of course has living sources, it was written very soon after the expedition of Hákon Hákonarson, has things like Hebrideans are very untrustworthy. And then when you get two aspirants from the Summer-led line coming to be kings of the Isles, Hákon Hákonarson is very dubious about one of them, Ione, but he likes one of them, Ione, Owen of Lorne. Lets him be king. The other one, Dougal MacRory, seems to have actually taken the kingship, gone back. Hákon, who's been the kingmaker, did let happen back in Norway, but as Dougal, as very much a second of a dodgy one. What actually happened when he got on his expedition is Ione, Owen of Lorne, said he got too much from the Scottish king to get involved in this fight, which wasn't very helpful. So he was kept in a kind of honourable custody, while Dougal MacRory, the dodgy one, and was actually his most important supporter in the Hebrides. That family is very interesting. Haakon had Dougal MacRory's son Erika on his ship when he came back to the Hebrides, but later in the fragmentary saga of Magnus Lawmender, successor to Haakon, Erika is there charged with keeping control of the Hebrides against Scotland. Meanwhile, his uncle Alan is on Loch Lomond causing havoc in Scotland, but later submits to Haakon and becomes the leader of the family because Erika, at the Treaty of Perth, and probably with something he managed to write in from his years at the Norwegian court, got the rights to go with all his gear and goods to Norway and made a diplomatic career in Norway. Meanwhile, on the other hand, Dougal MacRory's daughter, Erika's sister, was married to the King of Connaught. And so when we hear in the Irish annals that Haakon Haakonsson died on his way to Ireland, we have a natural link with the Gaelic resurgence in Connaught through the daughter and that marriage. And in fact, Dougal MacRory's death, you get in the Icelandic annals, but you also get in the annals of Boyle, of Loch Hay, from Boyle in what's now County Roscommon, Connaught ones, and the annals of Connaught. So, you have this family stretching the entire way from Connaught to Norway in one generation. And Dougal never gave in. He never submitted. He let his younger brother Alan do that. He just went off to the Outer Isles, and he died fighting. But he's called Conungur. But in the slightly later saga of Magnus Lawmender, he's merely Herra Dougal. He's been demoted, but he didn't know that. He wasn't having it. So you do get this. That's the only one occasion when we really get this complete stretch from two worlds. Mm-hmm.
Peter's just mentioned regarding Milak Alpha. I believe it's Milak Alpha, to which Haakon sails, is largely Carve by Tobermory rather than the Carf Island near Iona. His fleet sails through the Sound of Mull. So Peter's just suggesting it might be another location.
That is interesting. You have to be fairly secure you've got support on both sides, because the Sound of Mull is quite long, which I think is why people would have gone to Iona when they could. It's an interesting suggestion. I'd taken it that Calvor, it was actually the Ross of Mull, that long peninsula, rather than one of the Calf Islands. But I will take that on board. Thank you.
You mentioned about Ireland. I mean, I just thought about maybe Olaf the White after 980 being buried, going into to Iona and dying in exile, and that link with Ireland.
Yes, indeed.
And Iona. But then you mentioned later about the fact that it was a Benedictine monastery in Iona in the 11th, 12th century, and Castle Rushen or Rushen Abbey in the Isle of Man is Cistercian. I just was going to ask you, what do you think the effect of the Norman conquest, with Castle Rushen, with his connections with sort of the Furness Peninsula and Holm Cultrum in Cumbria and the sort of Stanley family, do you think then the Normans maybe affected the Trondheim bishopric, sort of broke it up a little bit?
I get the impression that the Trondheim bishopric always found there was a fair deal of moaning about the Hebrides. Perhaps they also found them untrustworthy, but the bishops seem to be consecrated all over the place, but very rarely, if ever, at Nitherols, Trondheim. And you get these later complaints about, it's difficult, distant weather and such like. And you think, well, actually, the Hebrides aren't distant if you're also providing bishops to the Faroes, Southern Iceland, Northern Iceland, and indeed Greenland. So perhaps it was the unfamiliar language, at least of the majority of the people. Though I think quite a few of the upper classes would have been bilingual, and the clerics at least trilingual. Sorry, I've lost my thread. What was the Olaf the White, was it? Sorry, we moved on from that. Yes, it's very clear that as soon as the Normans were in Ireland, there was a benefit to get the Kings of Man to protect Dublin, And you get a whole range of diplomatic records of Rigvaldur man getting so many barrels of that, wine usually every year, ever increasing. I mean, he was an absolute fraud. He demanded, when he was summoned to the English court, he demanded his travel expenses in advance, and if these ever increasing amounts, so he was obviously protecting them and involved with the Norman side of things. But the intermarriages of the Somerled family are very much with the Gaelic world of Ireland, including this one, but it wasn't the only one by any means. One of the Islay, Julia, I think it was, married the O'Brien High King just before, in the 1250s. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much. I'd just like to say thank you for a fascinating talk. We'll have to end it just there. We've just ran over slightly.
Oh, sorry.
But no, that was my fault. That was me asking questions. So thank you very much. If anyone would like to show the appreciation with the reactions, that'd be great. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for coming.